Welcome to the Ascalon Club, Dr. Reed. Take your place among the bearers of the lance.
One of us! One of us!
I love a good story, and personally I consider myself a good judge of what makes a good one and what makes a bad one. In fact, it was thanks to this that for a while my policy with games was exclusively I'd only play ones with good stories. While this policy has long since changed, I'm still drawn to games that advertise a strong focus on storytelling. Like Knights of the Old Republic, The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, and the game that this video is going to take a look at, Vampyr. The new RPG by Life is Strange developers Don't Nod Entertainment for PC, Xbox One, and PS4. And while Vampyr isn't bad in any particular area, it doesn't exactly excel at anything that doesn't connect to its story.
The wealthiest man in England. It is a pleasure to meet such a prominent figure of London.
A withering London figurehead, to be precise.
Narrative is easily Vampyr's biggest strength and ties itself into the gameplay in some flourishes of creative game and narrative design. Set against the backdrop of the Spanish flu epidemic that ravaged London in 1980, we play as Jonathan Reed, a British doctor who, after returning to London from the closing days of World War I, is turned into a vampire seemingly at random, and now finds himself thrown into a world of vampiric political intrigue as London is devastated by disease. On his journey to learn more about London's vampire scene, Jonathan encounters a wide variety of characters, and it's these characters that tie the story to mechanics like dynamic difficulty and the progression system. Jonathan receives barely any XP from defeating enemies or quests, whereas feeding on a civilian guarantees the player a sizable XP boost, but of course there's a catch. Feeding on a character will reduce the overall health quality of a district, thus spawning tougher enemies and removing that character from both their personal story and the larger narrative, whereas abstaining will slow Jonathan's progression to a crawl and keep combat at a consistent challenge throughout your time with the game, while also guaranteeing that as many characters as possible will contribute to the story as well as their own.
Everyone throw in the blame.
And don't think you won't grapple with whether or not you'll feed on a character, cause you will, since in order to max out the XP from a civilian you need to do quests for them, bring medicine when their health fails, and learn more about them by talking to other civilians, and their stories are all well realised.
Was Daddy a banker or a doctor himself?
In the end, you'll either feel for them and want to keep them going for the rest of the story, or want to end a civilian's life, not just for XP, but to see what impact it has on their social circles, or maybe they're just a dick and you want to get rid of them. Which was the case with me. In my playthrough, there was this homeless guy roughing up his son, so I thought, you know what mate, you don't deserve another night. So after feeding on him, I checked on his son and found that he was doing better. He got into a gang and started taking credit for his dad's death, which gave him some extra street cred. Little glimpses of creativity like this shine a spotlight on why story is Vampyr's biggest strength, most of the time. See, while the story is well realised, it was in dire need of an editor or at least a proofreader, because there's a giant problem of characters using terms and implying lore before it's even brought up. Jonathan mentions being a vampire and then has a character tell him he's a vampire and he acts surprised at being told this, or he refers to feral vampires by their official term without ever hearing it and is then told by another character that very same term and acts like he heard it for the first time. However, considering the overall quality, this is a nitpick, but it's something that once you start seeing it, it just pulls you out of the story, and it's one of the many signs of the game's status as a AA title. The devs are on record stating that they wanted to avoid taking Vampyr to a AAA publisher so that they could maximize creative freedom, and while it is clear that this was an admirable decision, it has come at a cost. On the technical side of things, the game is fine, but the PC version I played suffered from infrequent hiccups in the frame rate and freezing, with it sometimes even crashing after freezing. However, this was when I was primarily capturing footage, but even then that was just an absolute pain in my ass. Animations as well are a mixed bag. Cutscenes are in-game, and they've got solid character animations, and combat looks perfectly fine, but Reed's running animation is just an absolute joke. It looks like he's running not because he's, sprinting, but because it looks like he's about to shit his pants. And outside of cutscenes, facial animations are on par with Mass Effect Andromeda's. Unlike Andromeda, which had millions of dollars, this is forgivable, but it does still stick out like a sore thumb.
Loathing, disgust, and then they will plead to be turned. They will see it as salvation.
Visuals and sound design can be called a mixed bag as well, but a bag with more good in it than bad. Vampyr's London is suitably dark and gloomy, giving everything a Bram Stoker meets Victorian England look that thankfully never goes into lip service steampunk. And the different districts are visually distinct in architecture and landmarks, but don't expect a colour palette that has anything other than brown, dirt brown, and the occasional splash of red for blood. There's also some texture work that looks like it was ripped and repurposed from Life is Strange, given that there are some strangely blurry and out-of-place textures on certain parts of buildings throughout London. Sound design is solid and has consistently good voice acting, even though Reed's voice actor does give a pretty deadpan delivery most of the time. Music in comparison though is much weaker. Not to say it's bad, but it's unremarkable. Almost every game I've ever played has had at least one theme or track that would stick with me and I'd remember for at least a little while. But not Vampyr. As soon as you're done playing, you will think about your choices in the story and even possibly some frustrating combat encounters, but the music will never come up. It will fall from your memory like the diarrhea from your Taco Bell dinner the prior night. Now I'm sure you're wondering about the game's combat. Well, I'll tell you about it. It's fine. It's a simple hack and slash system, but instead of the typical quick attack, heavy attack setup, it's melee weapon and offhand weapon, the latter being a secondary melee weapon or a ranged weapon like a pistol or a shotgun. Throw in 2 swappable weapon sets and some vampiric superpowers and combat is well designed, but it lacks any real visual flair until you've unlocked and upgraded some vampire powers, which can take some time, so don't be surprised if combat doesn't grab you in the game's opening hours. Enemy variety is good too, with plenty of human and vampire foes with their own strengths and weaknesses to keep you on your toes. Throw in the dynamic difficulty and how it can change up enemy presence in the districts, and the game's combat can at least be expected to give a decent challenge during your time with it, even if there is a problem with stun locking weaker enemies later in the game. As far as games go, Vampyr won't go down history as a classic, but I can see it being well regarded by a dedicated fanbase thanks to its originality and tying story to gameplay. Just don't go into it expecting the next Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Rather, you should go into it expecting a solid follow-up to LA Noire, thanks not only due to its focus on narrative, but because its story relies heavily on character interaction and character studies rather than pure role-playing. If that doesn't put you off and you're curious to see what Vampyr has to offer, you can expect a flawed yet still solid experience that, like many others, shows Stephanie Meyer how vampires should be done.
I will find a cure, Mary. I swear it.
Alright, it was awesome to finally get this done. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you really liked it, then feel free to also like, favorite, and subscribe. Now for the next game review, I don't know what I'm going to review next, I haven't decided yet, but I'll pick something soon enough. I've also got some other movie reviews in the pipeline, but I also have an important announcement. There's going to be a shake-up at work, so for a month I'm going to be working flat out, and that is going to take time away from making videos. So expect my already slow output to get a little slower, but I'll still try to get stuff out as regularly as I can. Either way, I've got plenty of stuff in the pipeline, so like usual, feel free to stick around.